You brought that up.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, let's say you're going into something and you realize that you do not have an open mind when going into it. What practices do you perform or should you perform in order to get into an open state of mind?
Okay. Are you talking just, I don't know if this is going to matter, but are you talking about like in a, like in learning or in life or in some specific context or
everything?
Everything. Yeah. Good question.
Is there a difference?
I think that there might be context specific strategies, you know.
Okay.
Like for example, I think when you are going into an interaction with a person where you know that you've already formed a judgment of them, then I think that there's a lot of strategies that you have to do to like seize upon your gut reactions to their words. And I don't think that's really like a strategy that's relevant to like when you're reading a Rambam, you know, if you have like some, you know, like I think it's like meaning that the particular strategies are going to be different. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously a lot of the work has to be done ahead of time, right? And I think that in the derech of Mishlei, of focusing on particular examples and like seeing how a certain bias or prejudice or closed-mindedness skewed your understanding and how you got some sort of consequence from that, either a practical consequence or like you missed out on a certain thing or you totally like misunderstood something, and like really delving into that and then extrapolating a like a categorical mistake and then keeping the example and the mistake in mind when you walk into that situation in the future could like prime you to be on guard against things like that. That would be my first thing. I think also it helps to do a review of the fallacies and cognitive biases. You know, like they make different lists and stuff. I have let me see if I have my poster. Hold on. Fallacies. Is this it? Hold on. No, I had this for my AP English course. Well, you know, I think I found something else. I'm not sure. Fallacies. PowerPoint. Yeah. So, for example, I think the Lichters have have this in some sort of game or card form.
I think so.
Yeah. So, like, I got this all from this one poster, but like it basically goes through each one and it gives you a one sentence definition, an elaborate expanded definition, and then an example, you know? And so I think just going over these things, like, I don't know, you know, I've actually never done this before of like going through this before you go into the situation, you know, just to like review. Maybe that's why like having the flashcard thing, it could be a good example. I don't know if this would help, but I can't see it hurting. You know what I'm saying? Like going over ahead of time. And I actually forgot the formal definition between the formal difference between a fallacy and a cognitive bias. Because clearly they're related, but I don't really know the difference. But you should go through the biases also. Ariel, you have something to add, or that's for? Yeah, I saw the party sign. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if we use this in your morning.
Sure, why not?
Class,
yeah.
Yeah. So I was, you know, maybe like also to add on, I think to what you're saying, like, you know, I think you're right. I think it does depend on different situations. Meaning, like, I don't know if it's a universal thing because, like, I do know that, like, if you're like an expert in one area, you may not necessarily. This might have been a Mishlei Podcast. I don't remember, but like, you may not necessarily be open-minded to other people because you feel you're the expert in the area.
Right.
So like, you're not going to be willing to do that. So I guess like the question you can ask yourself is, you know, like, what's the root of the lack of open-mindedness?
Yeah, that is definitely an entire other like approach that you I think do need to take. How you do that is a much more complicated question, right? Like, because sometimes these things can just be surface level, and sometimes they could be like very, very deep within the psyche. And I'm sure there's different strategies for each one. Another thing I would say also is to be aware of triggers, things that, and again, especially in interactions or in like real life scenarios, then this is very important. But even in learning, like, let's say, for example, you know, like I myself am going to have a bias against let's say like, Hasidic ideas or mystical ideas that are going to like shut down my mind, or maybe based on certain people who say the ideas, and being aware of what triggers the mind to close down could help you to cut it off at the pass. I think also a technique that is useful in learning and in human interactions for preventing closed-mindedness is I was thinking about this in a certain recent chat conversation that there's the straw man approach, right, where you caricature the opponent's the other person's view, and then you like break down the simplified version. But then the opposite of that is the steel man approach, where you take what the person who you're talking with is saying, and you make the best case for it, which means you interpret their words generously. You don't assume that what they're saying is stupid. You assume that what they're saying is intelligent, and you give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of like, even let's say they're doing a horrible job of presenting their case, you make the best argument. And truthfully, it's going to help you in at least two ways. One is that it's going to help you overcome your own closed-mindedness and like actually like seek knowledge. But the other thing also is, what would you rather do? Like, let's say your opponent has an argument. Would you rather break down the best version of the argument or the worst version of the argument? Like, it's in your interest. If you, like if you're interested in truth, so then you'll get more at truth this way. And if you're interested in winning, isn't it a better victory, like to smash the best version of their argument? So I think it's like that's a very Mishlei strategy where you're working at something that serves your lo lishma interest of like beating your opponent, but you're also training yourself in a habit of mind that makes you a better truth seeker. Yeah. So I guess the answer to your original question about does it make a difference whether it's in human interactions or not, I still hold by what I said in the beginning, but it looks like a lot of the strategies do overlap, at least the ones that are coming to my mind right now. Yeah, that's off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a lot more. Yeah, David?
Well, first I'll answer your question, because I have a related sounding question, but I don't think it's actually the same question.
Okay. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. When you're learning something, and when you're learning an area that you have already learned, and say especially if you learned it recently, what do you do to free your mind of the way you have just learned in the past to enable yourself to learn it anew?
Yeah, hold on.
I'm asking both, say if you're learning it on your own and if you're learning it with, say, other people in like a different learning style the second time around. Okay,
that's a great question. Hold on just a second. I have a list of this that I wrote to Ayala at one point last year or 2 years ago. What did I call it though? What did I call it? Oh man, I'm not gonna be able to find this through email. Okay, well later on I can see if I can find like I wrote this all up as an email, but so one thing is one strategy is to this is gonna sound funny. One thing is to look for Chidushim. Okay, and I know that sounds funny, but this happens a lot in my Monday night Mishlei shir. I think it's because of the prakim that we're doing, not so much in our Monday night Mishlei shir, not so much in our morning Mishlei shir, which is that many times we'll have a pasuk, and to me it will feel like a cliche sounding idea, and to other people it'll be a chiddush, and then I will push for some sort. Like I'll push to try to find another chiddush, either a new way of looking at it or a new nuance. And a lot of that has to do with your own subjective relationship with the thing. Like maybe you have mined the source for all of the ideas, but like chances are if you look for something new, you'll find something new. So that's like, I don't know, that sounds obvious, but that's like a first thing is like actually look for something new. Second is go back to the basics, is ask all the basic questions that no one else is asking, because they think they know it already, So let's say, for example, I'm giving this shir in a couple of hours on arbakosos, and, the basic questions are, what's the deal with arbakosos and why are there four? Now everyone thinks they know the answer to that question because the Gemara says it's because of cherus, and then the Gemara gives all the reasons. But like, I'm finding that when I ask that question, then it is like, and I start from the beginning because I'm at a different point now in my own development than I was the first time I learned it. If I really honestly ask the question and start from scratch, then I see new things, so going back to the basics. Another approach is approach it as if you're going to teach it to someone who has no knowledge of it. which is, put yourself artificially in the mentality of someone who's starting off with zero knowledge. And that could be either a student who has, very little knowledge, or I always say, like, you should be able to explain this to a non-Jew who has zero background knowledge at all. And you'll find that if you explain it from the basics, you'll find that you sometimes have huge gaps in your knowledge or things that you're not clear on. And when you address those, then you'll find new ideas. Another approach is pick a new lens to look through it with. So that could be, for example, a new commentary, I will, I'll often, in the course of a year of the Kriyas Torah cycle, I'll have a go-to English commentary that I'll use to jumpstart my learning, my learning of the area. So for example, this year, I guess not this year, this is year 3 that I'm doing Shadal. I only have him on the first 3 books of Chumash because that's the only ones that they have in English. So I'll just flip through and skim the English because it's a new set of eyes. Or let's say Robert Alter, his translation, when I got that, it just opened up my eyes to new things. Or the Koran Tanakh of the Land of Israel, just things to from a completely different framework to jumpstart my learning. Or for example, I started this thought experiment this year when I was doing Haggadah stuff, but I kind of tabled it, which is reading the Haggadah through the eyes of the Ben Chacham. Okay, so in other words, pretend that you are new enough to the Seder where the experiences are unfamiliar, but you are intelligent. Okay, so how would you experience what's going on in the Haggadah, and what questions would you ask? And I found that was a really, really fruitful way to approach things. So just finding, or let's say again, or view it from a literary perspective, some sort of lens that is different from the way you have learned it in the past, or different from the way you typically learn things. And then by forcing yourself into that other lens, then you'll see new things and new questions.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So the new lens, there are several ways you can, use different lenses. Like you mentioned, different commentaries is one of the methods.
Yeah.
Different, perspectives, like the Chacham, it's funny, I don't know if this is also another lens or not, but sometimes in at least learning Gemara, I find, great example, Rebbe's Chiddush on the imaginative faculty, right?
Yeah.
He needed to take a step back and look at it, and he needed to find a new lens for it to make sense.
Right.
How do you do that? I want to find a new lens, that's deep. That's okay. There's lenses that are available, but then there's another level, okay. Because even in Gemara, you have a machlokas and you have your own preconceived lenses that you work with.
Right.
But there has to be others that you don't know about. And how can you, it's more of a step 2 question. But
you got to be careful there, because I don't know if, I wasn't there at this year, and I'm also not in Rebbe's mind, but I don't know. It's a
great place to be.
I can only imagine. I don't know if he went into the saying, I need to find a new lens. I think he was, given all the shiurim I've heard from Rebbe, it sounds like he was thinking through the area and found questions, and then the answer to those questions was through what we call svara, which is involving seeing things in a new perspective. I don't think he's that's not the same way I'm using the word lens. So I don't know. I'm going to demonstrate just one example of this, that I worked on this for 2 weeks, and I've mentioned this before. There's a whole sheer, I don't want to call it a graveyard, because these things hopefully will come to life at some point, but I tried working on the shiur for 2 weeks, and we didn't get anywhere, but we got really good questions. So here's an example of a lens. Okay, you look at the first way that the Chag HaMatzos is presented to Bnei Israel in Shemos. So we're used to reading this from the lens of people who already know what Pesach is. Okay, but just put yourself in the shoes of Bnei Israel. Okay, And imagine this. I'm just going to walk through it, not the whole thing, and we're not going to try to work on it. I just want to show you the lens. So you have in Shemos Yud Beis, Moshe gathers everyone together and then talks about Rosh Chodesh. Then he tells them the instructions for the Korban Pesach. All of that makes sense. Okay. Then he says in Yud Dalet, V'haya hayom hazeh lachem l'zikaron. This day should be for you as a memorial. V'chagosim oso chag l'Hashem l'dorosechem chukas olam techaguhu. You should celebrate it as a festival for Hashem for all your generations. As an eternal celebration. So first of all, what is this idea of a chag? Okay, we associate to chag like chagim, but this is Bnei Israel. They have not been given Torah yet. How are they going to relate to the concept of a celebration? Okay, and what is the difference between a memorial and a celebration? Okay, but then it gets weirder. Shivas yamim matzos tochelu, eat matzos for 7 days. Ach bayom harishon tashbisus or mibatechem. Okay, but on the first day, then cause leaven to cease from your houses. Now you have to remember, they don't know anything about chametz, right? Because we know about chametz because Bnei Israel didn't have time for their, and they also don't know anything about matzah, presumably, right? I mean, except other than what they're commanded by the Korban Pesach, but like they don't know anything about being taken out of Mitzrayim so fast that their dough didn't have time to rise. Okay, and then So getting rid of all seor mibatechem kikol ochel chametz v'nirksa nefesh ahim miyisrael miyom harishon ad yom hashvi. So now we're talking about kares. Now, what's the only notion of kares that Bnei Israel knew at that time? And the hint is that it's the only other mitzvah to say that's chayav kares. I know this is not.
Bris Milah.
Say it again.
Sorry, Bris Milah.
Bris Milah, yeah, right. Okay, so they're going to associate to Bris Milah because that's the only Masorah that they have about kares. Okay. Then you have Uvim HaRishon Mikra Kodesh. They're going to be like, what's a Mikra Kodesh? Okay. Uvim HaShvi Mikra Kodesh. We know that it's a Yom Tov. But remember, they have no concept of Yom Tov. And this is the most astonishing part. Yilachem Kol Malacha Lo Ye'aseh Behem. Don't do any malacha. They've never heard of an Isser Malacha before. Right? They haven't even been introduced to Shabbos yet. Okay. And they're already being introduced to Isser Malacha. Ach Asher Ye'achal L'chol Nefesh Hu Levado Ye'aseh Lechem. And then they get the Heter Ochel Nefesh. Okay, so like these are all, I'm just reading the psukim, but I'm just taking a new framework, and it's a framework that makes sense, which is Moshe's telling this to Bnei Israel. What would I have heard this as if I were Bnei Israel? So we asked all these questions, and like it just expanded this whole new like series of problems that like I haven't answered them yet, but like, you know, that's what I mean by like a new framework. And so Ariel, this is what I meant. To me, this is a new lens. I don't think Rebbe did that in order to arrive at his new svara for Bittul. Like you know, it's not like he's going out of his way to artificially apply like a new thing, you know.
Wait, just to clarify what I don't think, I think the imaginative faculty is a new lens, not I don't think that's the svara. Like he, like through his analysis and through his process, it made sense for him to come up with a new framework so that he
correct.
can,
right.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's different than what I'm saying, because David is saying, how do you get, what can you do to increase the chances of that happening? And I'm saying one of the strategies to increase the chance of that happening is to artificially impose a new framework. Yeah.
Could also just give like, I mean, where the scenario that this came from, and I think all your points notwithstanding as well, at least like where it came from was actually from like learning at Rebbe, where we had done that same run we did in Rabbi Gober's shiur, and then like that week now I was going to Rebbe's house and learning it at Rebbe's house. And I'm assuming that, and like it wasn't the exact same thing we'd been saying in Rabbi Gober's shiur. So everything that I had gotten from shiur over the week made plenty of sense to me. So I was like, everything, like we'd read the Rambam, go through the facts at Rebbe, I'm like, oh yeah, like this is what he's saying, because that's what made sense to me. So how to free myself from seeing it, like being stuck in what we saw in shiur and being able to see it anew as Rebbe's going through.
Right. So there's, it's funny because like, I used to have a very hard time when I was learning. I used to have a very hard time doing that. Like if something that I had learned made sense, I had a hard time setting it aside. I do feel like it's a combination of like when you're in the when you're in the honeymoon phase of ideas, of like the world of ideas, which could last for like the first, like, I don't know, like years of of yeshiva, then like the first conceptual explanation you hear of any area will feel like this is the truth of the area. But then the more you engage in learning and the more svaras you hear, the more you start to realize, oh, it's possible to have multiple like rational conceptual ways of looking at things, and it becomes somehow easier for you to set aside like a preconceived model of it, you know. I don't know. So there's like a certain like maturation process that naturally happens, but there's also an act of will of like actively suppressing the other idea, which you can't fully do. Like there's a Gemara about how one of the Amraim like fasted for 40 days to forget all the learning that he did with like someone, you know. So like I don't know what that's all about, but like there are ways to do that. And I used to have to do this with Rabbi Moskowitz because the blessing and the curse of Rabbi Moskowitz's mind was that he didn't have a good memory. So like we would learn a pasuk in Mishlei, and I would have learned it with him before, you know, and so he's approaching it fresh, and I would have to like suppress that way of looking at it in order to like get into that mentality. And you'll see, by the way, I don't know if this still happens at Rebbe's house, but I remember when he used to give shir in yeshiva, you know, he would be going through an area and usually on one of the moadim, and then someone would immediately like start answering the questions he raised by saying, Rebbe, didn't you say in 1975 that blah, 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 blah. And you could just, anyone who has open eyes can see that Rebbe doesn't want to be reminded of his old svaras. If he wanted to be reminded of his old svaras, he wouldn't give shir. He would just play a tape of himself, you know, but that's not how Chachamim operate, you know, like, so like, you know, he would not even want to hear about it because you don't want to influence your mind with, you want to keep away those influences of the previous ideas, you know, like as much as possible. So there's a certain willpower and like willful, like closing of the ears to this is where closed-mindedness can be harnessed, you know, close your mind off to the previous ways of thinking and like hit the reset button, you know. And again, I don't know how to do, you can only do that voluntarily so much. I had another idea. Hold on just a second. Another approach is, oh yeah, here's another one that sometimes can work, okay, is develop a methodology, okay? I know this sounds funny. Develop a methodology and like force it in order to try to find gaps and problems with it. So the best example, most familiar example with this is the pivot point theory in Tehillim, right? So those who've been in my Tehillim shiurim, you know, we have this theory that there's a pivot point in every parak of Tehillim, and we use that method to get ideas from Tehillim. Now, do I know that that theory is correct? No, I don't. But I found that it's fruitful to implement. And like, I might one day discover that it only works for certain kinds of a prakim in Tehillim, but the use of the method helps me to generate ideas, or Adler's 4 questions, you know? So like applying a method, not because you're convinced that this is the way to get ideas, but because it gives you some tool to use to like work with, you know? That's another way to generate Chidushim and to not have it be stale. Yeah, I think that covers a lot of what I said in the email to Ayala, but I'll have to see if I can dig it up.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good question. Yeah.
I wanted to say on something. Yeah, oh, right. Going to like, or it was more of like a comment about like, you know, Rebbe, you know, like with for new svaras and whatever, or coming, or, like you have to ask yourself, like, do you really think he hasn't learned this Gemara before? Like if he, like the first parak, you know, in, you know, the first daf of like Sachem, like when we're going through it, like
right.
Like there's a reason why he's opening that daf up.
Yeah, exactly.
Again.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
That's right. Okay, next question.
Yeah, I do have a question. Actually, I recently watched a horrible movie. I forgot what it was called. It's probably a good thing, but but basically, like the whole movie had to do with the fact that people are very scared of their shame coming out, right? Whether it's a small shame or a very big shame. In fact, like the antagonist of the movie was like a terrorist, and his whole his whole idea was to expose people's shame, which resulted in them committing suicide because they didn't want to bring it out.
Mm-hmm.
So like I felt like, wow, okay, even though it was a bad movie, but I wonder if there is some truth to that, and how would you like overcome that?
Truth to the fear of having your shame exposed?
Yeah, and like where's the source of that, and why do you have that shame?
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand what you mean by the phrase like your shame exposed, meaning like a thing that you're embarrassed about becoming known, or are you talking about the fact that you're ashamed?
That.
Right. all right, maybe I'm still misunderstanding this, but like, I mean, shame is a like basic part of the conscience, isn't it? Meaning like the need to have to be approved of or liked by your peer group, and also ego just in general of like viewing yourself as conforming to your values, and like when there's something that like is that goes against your values, then you feel that's a shortcoming. I mean,
that's for sure. It's definitely possible that I think the movie was taking it to the extreme where people are even committing suicide such that it doesn't even get exposed.
Yeah.
But like I guess it's a question more on ego in general. Like how do you what do you do? I mean let's say it's something that you don't want to get out there or whatever.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. So how would you overcome that fear, or how would you like tackle it so that you're not so you don't have a problem with it?
Okay.
That's more of like the question.
I see. Yeah, it's a good question. That's a very basic. That's a good kind of basic question. Well, on the surface, what I would say is similar to what I've said about guilt, which is that there is a purpose to the existence of the emotion, but the purpose is to prompt investigation of the thing that triggered it. And I know I've said this example before, but I'll say it again, that in the old dorm, then the smoke alarms were all interconnected, and when one went off, then all of them went off. And for some reason, they installed a smoke alarm right above the stove. And so what would happen is that, and it was a very sensitive smoke alarm. So like so let's say you were, this happened to me many times. Like, let's say like I'm asleep in bed, and I wake up with all the smoke alarms going off. So there's two possibilities. Either the building is on fire, or someone's making eggs, and so eventually, you're initially conditioned to just panic whenever you hear the smoke alarm, especially in that old building, which was a fire hazard in itself. But you become trained to hear the alarm and then to stop and say, okay, the alarm is signaling me, and the signal could mean danger or it could be innocuous. So that's how really you should relate to guilt, right? That guilt, a lot of people relate to guilt is they treat guilt as a type of perception, that if I feel guilty, it means I am doing something wrong. And if I don't feel guilty, it means I am not doing something wrong. But guilt really should be an impetus to investigation, which is, if you feel guilty, you should say, okay, well, am I doing something wrong? Or is someone making me feel guilty? Or am I making myself feel guilty for some reason that is not actually, like, I'm actually doing everything right, and this guilt is coming from some like irrational place or some imagination or some authority or something like that. Same thing with shame, I think, is that like, people feel shame for legitimate reasons, that they, like shame is a key component in teshuvah, right? That after you do teshuvah, or as part of the teshuvah process, after you, recognize that what you did wrong and stop doing it, and remove it from your plans and resolve not to do it again, you have to recognize the consequences of what you were doing and then have a shame that comes from acting that way. So that's like a healthy shame that's in line with perfection. But then people feel shame all the time for stuff that is just totally nonsense, either, or worse than nonsense. Sometimes you could feel shame for doing something that's actually good, So like I would say that any step of overcoming the shame has to start from recognizing that shame is not the same thing as knowledge. It's not a form of perception that you're doing something wrong. It's a cue to engage in investigation. Yeah, that's a good move. Yeah.
First step. Do you have a question on this?
I have a thought.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, I mean, interesting also with what you're saying of how that shame would then be like some sort of like signal that there's something that you could potentially, like, there's a potential harm or something potentially not great here.
Yeah.
That then if you view shame in that way, then I think it's much easier to then, like in an IFS type of way, of like feel positively towards the feeling of shame.
Yeah.
And then with that being the case, I think it's much easier to be open to feeling that shame, or at least just to be willing to interact with it.
Yes.
I think with that, then also probably makes it much easier to then open yourself
Right.
up to these things.
Okay, that was exactly what I was going to say. That's a good example. And that actually, you're right, that comes prior to the step I was describing, which is first you have to be willing to feel the shame, right? Like the Tara Brach says something that I forgot where she got it from, but she said like one of the most important questions you can ask yourself is the question, what is it that I am unwilling to feel? And the answer to that question is going to be where your development is going to take place, you know, and being able to like allow yourself to feel those feelings has to be the step in order to do anything with the shame, to do what I described, or like David mentioned with the IFS, which is what I was going to say now, is the shame is coming from some part of your psyche that is trying to help you, you know? So being able to listen to the shame and talk to the shame and interact with the shame and have gratitude towards the shame, instead of trying to squash it or suppress it or be angry at it, is going to be a useful thing for getting the most out of like what that shame is and for getting the self-knowledge. And I think that also like ideally could be, I would say ideally it's prior to the process I described, but it also is a lot harder to do. Like, I think you can get a lot out of just doing a purely cognitive investigation of whether it's worth it to feel, whether it's good to feel, whether it's productive to feel shame about a certain thing or not. Like I'd say like everyone can do that. Whether you can actually like sit with the shame and like really like talk to it and stuff, that's like a much higher level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had another question. Okay, so
wait, on this topic.
Yeah, on this topic,
yeah.
I had a follow up. Okay, so your first step was to kind of like analyze whether this shame is, you know, is free.
Well, let me recap it in chronological order now. Okay, in terms of like what you should do. The chronological order is stop and just recognize that you are feeling a shame, and then you know, another Tara Brach thing. You know, she has the acronym of RAIN, which is her one of her types of meditation, which is an acronym for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And so the first step is just recognizing I am feeling shame. Okay, like just being aware of it, because a lot of people also like don't actually diagnose what they're feeling. They just, you know, they're a slave to the feeling that they're not even conscious of. So just recognizing it and allowing it, just means to say like this is something I'm experiencing, or I like this is okay. Like I'm okay that I am feeling this. And investigation is the next step. And investigation is on two levels: cognitive and like emotional or psychological. So the cognitive one is what I was saying, which is ask yourself, is this something that is wrong, that the shame is warranted for, or is the shame coming from some other place? And then the psychological thing is like what David was saying, is like an IFS type thing of like, you know, asking like where is this coming from within me, and what is that part of me trying to do? Why is the thing it has to do that? Where is it trying to protect me from? Yeah, go ahead, Ariel.
Yeah, so okay, so follow up to that is you know, the cognitive investigation. So how do you know meaning how do you determine whether or not this shame is appropriate or not appropriate? Meaning, who determines that?
Well, I mean, we have a very good guide in the Torah, both in terms of halacha and in terms of the values of Torah. So I would say that for most cases, that's going to suffice. You know, like, you know, I think you know, the devil's always in the details, and the Satan's also in the details. That like, you know, when you feel ashamed about the way you interacted with a certain person, you do have the Torah as an overall framework, you know, of like, you know, did I embarrass this person in public? Did I speak lashon hara about them and stuff? But many times it's going to come down to something particular about that relationship, and it's going to be hard to use the Torah as a roadmap for that.
Yeah. So let's say you're talking to a non-Jewish person.
Yeah.
Right. How would they figure that out? Or they're just really in a bad situation?
I mean, it's much harder, you know, because you don't even know if they have the access to the right values, you know.
Yeah, because it seems like that most people are have this quote unquote objective idea of what should be shameful, and that's based off of society.
Right. Most of the time it's going to be based off of society or their upbringing, or a combination of both. Yeah, it's hard.
So how do you talk to a guy like that?
I mean, you could use Mishlei because, but again, it's not going to cover all cases, but like, Mishlei does not really care about shame as much as it cares about consequences, So like, let's say like in Torah, if you speak Lashon Hara about somebody, so in a Torah framework, you are doing something that is an imperfection. It's equal to Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos and Shvichus Damim. It is killing 3 people. Like there's like a Torah approach, which is much higher level. What does Mishlei care about? Mishlei cares about consequences. So what are going to be the consequences of you doing this on yourself and the other person? So that's something that is accessible. That type of thinking is accessible even to someone who doesn't have Torah. Like what are the consequences going to be? Now, the thing is that the whole value system in which they're evaluating consequences might be off, so like that's a downside. And also there are certain areas that are very hard to see the consequences in. For example, like, in the areas that we call mishpatim, then the consequences, which Mishlei focuses on, the consequences are discernible with your own like mind. But in the areas like chukim, the consequences are not so apparent. So it's not going to be a full system, but it's definitely, you're going to get a lot of good work done through just Mishlei. Yeah, Isaac?
Okay.
I have a different question.
Okay, sure. Well, this will probably be the last question unless it's fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't the Masechtos in Taros have Gemaras on them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because at the time, then those were less studied, right? I mean, because they weren't as practical.
Yeah. Okay. So
right, like Nida is the only one that does, right?
Yeah.
Because that was practical. But same reason for that in Kachim. Like, I mean, I know Kachim has Gemaras also, but like,
that was going to be my follow up.
Right.
Talking Menachos have Gemaras.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the broad answer is I'm under the impression it's historical circumstance, but I don't know. I don't exactly know why. Like, I don't know if there was a. I have no idea. Yeah, but I assume it's historical circumstances. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess we have time for another question. We have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the school of thought called Phenomenology?
I was familiar with it on a textbook level, and that's about it. You want to recap and
By my understanding, phenomenology is this idea that it's concerning how do we know things, right?
Yeah.
And what is the process by which we come to understanding of things?
Mm-hmm.
And the perspective is that as human beings, we all only have the subjective. Right. So we are relating to some objective reality, but we're purely existing within a subjective, and there is truth within that subjectivity.
Yeah.
And it's only it's not like a full truth. And so the only way of discovering truth is through combining different subjectivities. So like, for instance, if like I'm looking at an image, so I'm looking at it from one side, and then somebody else is looking at that same image from a different side, and then through conversing, we can get a broader understanding of that entire image.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, how does that relate to how within Judaism we understand the passing on of truth, right?
Yeah.
And the development of truth? And because on the one hand, like for sure, we would say that as human beings, we cannot have the complete picture.
Right.
On the other hand, how much we say subjective truth is truth, and how we understand receiving truth from other people and all those different things is something that like I'm not sure fully how it would fit in, or whether or not it would work.
Okay, so let me answer by just the only answer I think I'm equipped to give is a roadmap, which is that I think the way that you framed phenomenology is already taking a stance on this. Okay. That phenomenology is something that was engaged in. Phenomenology is the study of experience and thinking about experience. Okay. But there is also epistemology, which is the study of how we know what we know. And then ontology, which is the nature of reality. Okay. And these 3 things are all related. So you can examine something through in terms of phenomenology and be an objectivist in the sense of holding by objective reality. And you can also be engage in phenomenology as a postmodernist who holds that there is no such thing as objective truth. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So, for example, you'll find in the Rav that the Rav many times will talk about various forms of religious phenomenology. Even in Halakhic Man, that's to a large extent what Halakhic Man is about, is the experiential dimension of relating to the Torah's objective categories. Okay, and developing a philosophy based on that about like the role of what experience plays and the role of what subjectivity plays and how that interacts. I think also from Ubikashta Misham with Yedias Hashem, because that's an area where we say we can't have positive knowledge, and so to a certain extent we're limited by our subjectivities. So, but the Rav, as far as I know, is operating in an objective framework, that there is an objective reality. In contrast, Rabbi Shagar, who, whether or not he is a postmodernist, was writing about Torah in a postmodernist lens, has in that book of Tablets Shattered or whatever his popular English book is, has an excellent article on like developing a theory of Tamei HaMitzvos based on a non-objective religious phenomenology, where you just look at I think one of the examples he gave. Oh, did I actually hold on? Did I have any? Let me see if I wrote down the excerpt of this. No, I did not write down an excerpt of this. Faith Shattered and Restored. That's the book I was talking about. So he talks, for example, about, let's say, like the laws of Nida. Okay, the laws of Nida, regardless of what you hold about epistemological truth, a couple keeping the laws of Nida, it will have a certain impact and it will shape their relationship and interactions in certain ways. And his like approach to Tamei Mitzvos was based on like taking those phenomena and just like in examining them intellectually and seeing how they structure Jewish society or how they structure relationships, So like, so the roadmap is, I guess, whenever you're involved in phenomenology, you do have to be aware of what epistemological framework you're working with, and that's going to dictate where you place phenomenology.
And by epistemological, you mean whether or not you believe in an objective reality or subjective reality?
I mean how we know what we know and how we differentiate between knowledge and opinion and what that even means.
Okay. Yeah. And then ontological, you raise that as well. So where does that fit?
So I don't know the precise relationship between epistemology and ontology, but episteme, I think, means knowledge. Let's just check. Hold on a second here. Epistemology is to know, and then ontology, I think ontos or ontic is being. Yeah, being, right? So the study of being and the study of knowledge, which are clearly interrelated, So I don't know which one is. I don't know if the two disciplines are like parallel or if one is subsumed under the other, or if that answer to that question is based on your stance of that, and then phenomenology is gonna relate to both of them, because it's about what we experience and how experience is related to knowledge and how experience is related to reality. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just another further quick question on that. Yeah. So then this is the question is partially inspired by the Jewish existentialist class that I'm taking.
Yeah, I figured.
Right. In terms of, so my professor suggested that the whole concept of Nas 70 Shema is working within the phenomenological framework, right? And that through doing and experiencing, then you come to understand it.
Yeah.
And just your thoughts on that.
I would say that that's definitely a reasonable theory, like that is seems to clearly be how halacha is modeled, right? Like you are doing these actions, and the actions are shape the way that you view and interact with the world. And yeah, it's true that you also engage in Talmud Torah, and the Talmud Torah changes the way that you understand the actions, but it seems to be action led in many ways. But again, this is ripe ground for developing more elaborate and sophisticated theories that are fun to think about, but not don't lend themselves to short answers. It's good. It's a good thing to think about, though. I think it's a great thing, and especially talking about Chidushim, I mean, thinking about this in the Seder, I mean, again, like that question I said about like, how do you experience the Seder as a Ben Chacham? Like, in order for the father to do V'higadah L'bincha correctly, he has to put himself in the mindset of his son and then think, how is my son going to experience this? And so I think it's like the questions you're asking are very, very related to like the way that a father has to think about when conducting a Seder, Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If I don't speak to you guys, I'm sure we'll talk on chat, but if I don't speak to you before Pesach, then have a Chag Sameach. I'm glad.
Yeah, you too.
Safe trips if you're going anywhere. And if you're not, then safe walking down the street. Okay. All right. Take care.
Thank
have
you.
a good Shabbos.